All right, today we're jumping right into a really powerful blueprint for community identity, one found in the New Testament. We're going to be using a study guide from Grace Free Lutheran Church as our map to unpack the incredible living metaphors in the second chapter of 1 Peter. So let's dive in. The whole passage really builds up to this amazing declaration. And you have to remember, these aren't just pretty poetic titles. They're being presented as a brand new reality for people who were just described as elect exiles. So the big question is, what does all of this actually mean? And that's really the core question our source material is tackling. It suggests these aren't just dusty historical labels. No, this is a living, breathing blueprint for who this community is and what it's supposed to do. So the way our source document lays this all out is as a sequence of images that are all connected: newborn infants, living stones, and a spiritual house. These metaphors aren't just sitting there, they're active. They build on each other to paint this really cohesive picture of a whole new identity. And here it is. This is our guide for today. We're going to walk through its analysis step by step, really seeing the logic of the passage through the lens of this particular study. Everything, and I mean everything, starts with the central figure, Christ. The text describes him with this really fascinating paradox. The main idea here is something that sounds like it can't be true: a living stone. By definition, stones are, well, not alive. But the source points out that Christ is called a living stone. He's active, he's risen, he's the foundation. And this one image, it sets the stage for everything else that comes after. Now, this one single stone prompts two totally opposite judgments. Our source notes that from our human point of view, this stone was rejected. But from God's perspective, it's chosen and precious. And that's a really crucial tension running through this whole passage. And those two different verdicts? Well, they lead to two wildly different outcomes. For people who believe Christ is the cornerstone, a totally secure foundation. But for those who don't, that very same stone becomes what the text calls a stone of stumbling. According to our source, there's just no neutral ground here. So if Christ is the living cornerstone, what gets built on top of that foundation? This is where the passage expands the metaphor to include the entire community. Okay, this is a super important point our source highlights, and it all comes down to the grammar. The text says believers are being built. It's passive. This isn't a self-help project where they're building themselves into something better. Nope, they are the actual materials in a divine construction project. And this idea, well, it leads to a huge theological shift. The study guide explains that the very place where God dwells on earth moves from being a physical building, a temple, to the community of people itself. So this spiritual house is the community. Every single person, because they're connected to that living cornerstone, becomes a living stone. It's just a powerful image of this unified, living structure being built by God. Okay, so now that we get the structure, the house, the passage zooms right in on the identity of these living stones. They're given 4 very specific titles. What our source points out is that these titles aren't brand new. They were actually first given to ancient Israel. And now here in this letter, they're being applied to this new international community to define who they are and what they're for. Now that term priesthood is probably the most loaded of the 4. The study guide points out that this idea, what's called the priesthood of all believers, has been the source of a lot of comfort, but also a lot of confusion. So let's break down what it actually means. This breakdown from our source is just incredibly helpful. It makes it really clear. Yes, this priesthood means every believer has direct access to God and a call to serve, but it does not mean we don't need pastors, or that every single person has the exact same job. The 2 roles are actually meant to work together. And why? Why are they given this identity? Our source highlights the purpose that's stated right there in the text. This new identity isn't just for them to feel good about themselves, it's so they can proclaim the excellencies of God. It's an identity that comes with a mission. And finally, the passage pulls all of these ideas together, the cornerstone, the house, the priesthood, into one powerful summary. It's framed as a dramatic before and after story. This is the whole narrative in a nutshell. Once they were outsiders, now they are God's people. Once they hadn't received mercy, now they have. It's this simple once/now structure that just captures the entire transformation. And that right there, that's the ultimate takeaway. Our source argues that this isn't just about a one-time event. It is the basic rhythm of this identity, a constant story of remembering where you came from
and who you are now, all because of mercy. So let's quickly recap the main points from our source. First, God's word is essential for life, like daily food. Second, Christ is the decisive cornerstone, no middle ground. Third, the church is God's construction project, not our own. And finally, at the very heart of it all is that once-now story of transformation through mercy.
And that leaves us with one final question to chew on, pulled right from the source's own discussion prompts. If our identity is really a story, what does it mean for that story to always be defined by this once/now structure, a past reality and a present one? What does that actually look like, lived out day to day? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.